Welcome back to the Inquisitive Analyst. Marcus Udikang here. And I have been away from interviewing guests for a while, so I'm back to doing it for a bit. And I've got a fabulous guest today. He's a retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel. He's also an author, and he's also an internationally recognized keynote speaker. He's written this book called Your Leadership Legacy: Becoming the Leader You Were Meant to Be. And it's based on his 40 plus years of leadership in the US Army, as well as his civilian life. And it's all about benefiting, all about inspiring leaders of tomorrow. And I want to say that the emphasis of this book and the presentations that my guest gives, it's all about effective communication. It's all about decision making. It's all about empowerment and leadership. And all these timeless principles are highly valid to business analysts. So that's why I have Oakland McCulloch, also known as Oak, on my show all the way from Florida. So welcome, Oak.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Marcus.
You're very welcome. We had a conversation not too long ago, and I want to bring some of the topics that we discussed then to today's interview. And like I said in my introduction, it's all about leadership. So let's start off by talking about the simple acts of kindness that leaders should show. What do you think?
So one of the things, I've been lucky over the last 15 years working with the Army, both on active duty and as a Department of the Army civilian. And I would say probably also a little bit in my food bank experience as well. But for the last 15 years with the Army, I've had my hand in commissioning over 580 lieutenants to be leaders in the Army and in this country. And I made it a point to tell every single one of them as often as I could, but especially the day they got commissioned, that their goal should be to go out and make a difference, a positive difference in at least one person's life every day. I said, look, as a leader, you are going to make a difference in somebody's life every day. Guaranteed, promise. Or you're not a leader. If you are a leader, you're going to make a difference in somebody's life every day. Why not make a conscious decision to make a positive difference in somebody's life? Just imagine how much better our families, our neighborhoods, our communities, our cities, our teams, our companies would be if everybody did that.
I think that's particularly important, especially as we see the news today and we see so many questionable, bad things happening. And sometimes it can deter someone, but I think usually good prevails, always good prevails. And I like the point that you brought up about family and personal endeavors. We need to be able to juggle our families while trying to make other people and their families happy as well. And that can sometimes it can be difficult to do that. And I think that all centers around what we call servant leadership. Do you have anything to say about servant leadership in general?
Yeah, so I'm a huge believer in servant leadership. Some of the best leaders I worked for throughout my life, not just in the Army, but throughout my life in high school and in the Army, at the food bank, as a government service officer. The best leaders were always the servant leaders. And so I saw that. I know how it made me feel, so I'm a huge believer in that. And this is the way I describe what servant leadership is. And it's funny because when I talk about servant leadership, I'll always get somebody who'll say, well, I don't want to be a servant leader because I don't want people walking all over me. I said, then obviously you don't understand what servant leadership is about, because that's not what it's about. Guaranteed, if you're a servant leader, you are going to have to make people do things they don't want to do because it's in their best interest. They may not know it at that point, but it is. So for me, servant leadership is very simple. I always tell people, look, it's not about you, and yet it's all about you. It is not about the title you're going to get or the privileges you get, or that you're going to get more pay, you're going to get to live in a nicer house and drive a nicer car. Let's face it, leaders get those things generally, and that's okay, as long as that is not the only reason you want to be the leader. If that's the only reason you want to be the leader, please go do something else, because you're not going to be a good one. It is all about you and how you treat and empower the people and that you have the privilege to lead. And it is a privilege to be the leader, and how you make your organization better, not only for you and so that you make money, but for the people that are working in that organization as well. That's what servant leadership is about. And to do it well, you have to get to know the people that you have the privilege to lead. Because if you don't know them, if you don't know what they want out of life, then how can you help them get there?
And getting to know them helps you to get, I think, team buy-in whenever you're doing a project of some sort, in the case of us business analysts. And getting to know, so can you give an example of how to get to know? I'll give you an example, and you can add one too. I've often been told when you get into a room with a team, the best thing is to start asking people about themselves. How was your day? How's that baby that you just had? How's your wife doing? How's your husband doing? Any other examples about how to focus on other people?
Yeah, absolutely. And so again, go back to leadership piece of it. Look, leadership is about people and trust. Period. End of story. There is no and. It's people and trust. Everything else in leadership comes to that. And people aren't going to trust you if they don't know you and you haven't made the effort to get to know them. Sorry, that's just not human nature. We trust people we know and people that care about us. That's who we trust. So one of the things I tell leaders is there's a couple of ways to get to know the people that you have the privilege to lead. And yours is an absolute perfect example. But I tell them, look, first of all, get out from behind your desk. Nobody wants to be led by somebody who's sitting behind their desk all the time. Get out from behind your desk and get out there where the people you're leading are. Let them see you. Let them get to know you a little bit. And there's a couple of easy ways to do that. I tell everybody, look, your goal as a leader every day, besides making a difference in somebody's life, the other goal that you should have every day is every day you go out in your organization, find one person. If you can do this with 10 people every day, good for you. But every day, find at least one person and find out something new about that person. Something personal, not about work. Find out about their, like you said, their spouse's name. What does their spouse do? What's their kids' names? What sports do their kids play? What hobbies do they have? What do they like? What don't they like? That starts to build that trust. It also allows you to get to know them a little bit so that when you are assigning projects, you know whether or not that's the right person for that project. You know, something that they tell you may tell you, yeah, this person is good and I like what they do, but this probably isn't the right person for that job. So, and the only way you're going to know that is if you get to know them. I had a boss who retired a 3-star general. So obviously way smarter than me. And he told me one time, he said, Oak, I don't care how high up in your organization you get. Never, ever, ever turn down a chance to go get your own cup of coffee. He said 2 things happen when you do that. He says, number one, you show everybody in your organization that you are no better than they are. You have to go get your own cup of coffee just like they do. And so you start to build that trust. And number 2, if you're lucky, you got 2 or 3 different ways to get to the coffee pot and back to your office. So you can stop along the way and talk to different people every time you go. And that's great advice, huge advice. And I've used it throughout the years. The other thing that I would tell you that I see going away, unfortunately, because it's a great way, not only for you to get to know your people and for them to get to know you, but for them to get to know each other. And that's just as important, is having get-togethers, you know, maybe once a month, once a quarter, whatever you want to do, have a luncheon where you identify people who have done a great job. You identify people who have a birthday or an anniversary. Then again, you got to get to know people to know that, right? So, but just to identify people and let them mingle among themselves and get to know each other. Because, you know, as Vince Lombardi, probably the greatest football coach that America's ever had, used to say a team, and that's what your people are, is a team. Not a sports team, but a team. It doesn't matter. A team is not a group of people who play together or work together. They're a group of people who trust each other. And again, they're not going to trust each other if they don't know each other. So make that effort to get the group together, your team together as often as you can in a social, not work environment, in a social type environment. And I think you'll see great benefits out of it.
It's interesting that you bring that up because I worked for a company here in Calgary, a very good company. And my boss, who had been there for many years, got to know his staff who had been there for 10, 15 years. But the IT department that I worked in was relatively new. The longest person had been around for 3 years. But this fellow decided to pay out of his own pocket a summer lunch barbecue in a park, just a nearby park. So we took half a day off, and he had planned this thing out. I didn't even know. He gave us, he had beer. He had paid out of his own money, pop, water, obviously. There were hamburgers, there were hot dogs. Some of the people were playing baseball. And he said it was just a day to be casual. You could talk about work if you wanted to. And I thought, you know what, this is amazing. Yes, they took us out to lunches on the compound that we worked on, at. And
Right.
yes, the department paid for the lunches, but this was his own thing to us, right? Out of his own pocket. And I thought that was really cool.
It is. I mean, it's nice when leaders go that extra mile, that extra little effort to prove that they care about the people that they're leading.
Yeah.
That goes a long way. Now, I got it. You can't do that every
No.
month, but have the company luncheons every month or at least once a quarter. And
Yeah.
then, once a year, maybe the leader does splurge and take everybody out to whatever,
Yeah.
a picnic or whatever, and pays for it and gets it done so that everybody has that opportunity to get to know each other.
Yeah. And I like what you were talking about, the strengths, trying to understand the strengths of the people on your team. And that kind of moves into professional development. So if you know someone needs a gap filled, they should get some courses to fill that gap. And it's making that recommendation to them to say, maybe you want to take this course. And I know that a lot of people get into a room, especially introverts who are leading a team, and the expectation is that the team will just mesh together if you assign work. It's not going to work that way. So how do
Very
you,
rarely.
yeah, you get into a room, how do you get people how do you start assigning them tasks without them running away and being, you know, anti Oak or anti Marcus? What's the key to gluing those people together? Assuming you're new on a project, you don't know your team yet, and you're trying to get them to get work done.
Right. Yeah. So I think part of it is, you do have to make that effort to be personal, to get to know people. But if you're brand new on the team and you haven't had that opportunity yet, then I always tell people, then you got to make sure that people understand that you value their input. So if you just got assigned a job on a project, maybe the first thing you do is you walk in and say, okay, I got selected, I'm it to be the leader of this. You guys all got selected to be on this team. So let's first of all just say, this is what we have to get accomplished. Give me some ideas. I've got some ideas how I think we can do it, but you give me your ideas of how you think we can accomplish this. And write them down on a whiteboard, poster board, whatever it is, write them down and just go through the strengths and weaknesses of each one of those suggestions. And then, usually what I've found is, first of all, you've already started to build trust because you asked their opinion. Whether you use it or not, you've asked that opinion. Maybe you use it next time if you didn't use it this time, but at least you asked. So you're not that egotistical, authoritarian, micromanaging leader that everybody hates to work for. Then what I have found generally happens when I do that is that I take a little bit of this person's ideas and a little bit of that person's idea, and then I'll throw in some of mine, and then we come up with the solution. Two things just happen when you do that. Number one, again, you build trust because you asked people's opinion. And number two, now it is no longer Colonel McCulloch's solution. It's our solution. Now we got buy-in. Now they got skin in the game. Now they got a reason to make it successful because they had a say in it. And I think if you do that, I think you'll find that will break the ice, and then it'll also give you some great ideas. Look, we all have an ego. Anybody who tells you they don't have an ego is lying to you. Okay, we all do, and we want people to have an ego. That's what drives people to be successful. That's what drives people to be the best at whatever they do. We want people to have an ego. Good leaders know when to put that ego aside and say, look, I know I'm good, but I know I don't have all the answers, and I don't have all the skills and all the abilities. If you do that, then you're using their skills and their abilities and their talents. And they may have a skill that you don't have, or a talent that you don't have. And that's what makes the team successful, is when you can use everybody's talent on the team.
And that kind of moves into the art of delegating. You're on that team. You've talked about the reasons why you need to get this outcome. How do you start delegating to people?
Yeah. So I think, first of all, I think so a lot of it will be done because you know who's on your team, and you know what their expertise is. However, every once in a while somebody will surprise you, and if you let them throw out ideas, it may even surprise you more, and you find out, well, if you threw out that idea, then that probably means you know a little bit about this area. And so maybe that's somebody that you delegate something like that to. But I think one of the things, and I'm an advocate of making sure, if you got somebody, like you said, an introvert in your group, you make sure that they have a responsibility. Now, I'm a firm believer that if you do that, you got to make sure that you give them something that you know they can do. Because if you give them something they can't do and they fail, they're done. You can forget about ever getting them involved in anything else. But if you can give them something small that you know they can do, now they start to build their confidence. They start to build, they start to believe in themselves a little bit more. And they may have believed in themselves, but now they believe in themselves in public, where everybody else can start to believe in them as well. And you'll start to see them come out of that shell. But don't be afraid to delegate people. You have to delegate things to people. That's how, because if you don't, then you're going to be overwhelmed, and you may accomplish the mission or the task or the project or whatever it is that you're on, but it won't be as good as it could have been if you delegate things to people and use their talents.
No, it's good. Sometimes you think, I'm on this project, this guy, person A and person B is not giving me what I want. I need that. I'll just do it myself. Well, that's the worst.
Horrible. Horrible.
Not going to work out.
Yeah. You know, which leads us to micromanaging, and which is an evil. It is absolutely evil. No other word to mention to describe it. And here's why it's evil. Because when you do that, and it's hard, we've all done it. You know, you give somebody an assignment and they're struggling, and you know you could do that in 30 minutes. It's hard not to walk up and say, get out of my way, I'll do that. But when you do that, you're not helping anybody. You're not helping yourself, you're not helping the organization, and you're certainly not helping that person. Because now what you've done, this is the evil of it, you have cheated that person out of that experience. The real evil is that you not only cheated that person out of that experience, but you have now cheated everybody who's going to work for that person out of that experience, because he or she can't pass it on, the experience that they got. So you may be affecting your organization for the next 5, 10, 15 years when you do that. You know, I had a boss, again, that retired, a 4-star general, and he said, oh, leadership is on a scale. On this end of the scale, you have micromanaging, authoritarian, do it exactly as I tell you to do it. Horrible. Micromanaging leaders that none of us want to work for. We've all worked for them, and none of us want to. And on this end of the scale, you have Attila the Hun and chaos. Controlled chaos, but chaos. And you want to be as far down that scale toward chaos as you feel comfortable. He said, and this is how you get there. You train people to the standard that you expect them to meet, so you know they can do what you're asking them to do. You give them the big picture of what it is you want. At the end, this is what it has to look like. you give them the resources they need, time, people, money, equipment, whatever it is. Then you give them the authority, because authority is something that you as the leader have that you can give to them to allow them to accomplish what you're asking them to accomplish. Then you get out of their way and let them do it. Doesn't mean that you wash your hands of it. You're still there for advice, for if they got questions, if they need more resources, whatever, you're still there, and you check up on it every once in a while, make sure it's going on the right direction. But you let them do it the way they want to do it. I always use this analogy. 7 plus 2, if we got to get to 9, 7 plus 2 is 9, but so is 6 plus 3, and 5 plus 4, and 8 plus 1. How do you care how we get to 9? We just got to get to 9. Let them figure out how they're going to get there, and you will be absolutely amazed at what they will do for you.
Wow, amazing. And I'm sure that a different context means something different to a leader. So for example, you've just explained one way to get something done, but if you go to another team, the context is different, and you can't use the same solution that worked.
No, you can't. Look, there is no cookie cutter solution for leadership, and we don't want one. We don't want robots as leaders. Sorry, that's not what we want. We want people to use their strengths, their knowledge, their skills and abilities as a leader, whatever those are, to get the best out of that team. And what works for you may not work for me. And what works for me may not work for you. We're different people, thank God. That's what makes life interesting. That's what makes life worth living, is everybody's a little different. And that's okay. But just remember the principles. The principles don't change. You know, the things you have to be able to do to be a leader, and they're not hard. Those things aren't hard. The hard part's doing it. Actually doing it on a day-to-day basis, putting those principles into practice. But what you have to do isn't hard, but just remember the principles, and however you use them in your strengths, in your what works for you, that's okay. Again, there is no cookie cutter solution, and we don't want one.
Any takeaways for the audience? One or two things we should focus on. For example, how do you grow into that big leader?
How do you what?
How do you grow into that big and great leader?
So professional development, 2 things: professional development and never turn down a leadership opportunity. So for professional development for me is really simple. It's, you got to read, that old, I think it was Harry S. Truman said, not all readers are leaders, but all leaders are readers. And I believe that. Read everything you can about leadership. Books, articles, bulletins, blogs, whatever. Now, look, there's a lot of crap out there about leadership. I got that. But you can learn just as much from that. You can learn what not to do as opposed to what to do. But I always tell people, pick great leaders and read their autobiographies, because then not only do you learn what they did that you might be able to do, but you learn why they did what they did. You get into their mind, the thought process of what they were going through as they were making that decision to do what they did that made them special. So read autobiographies. I'm a firm believer in that. And then if you're the leader, if you are a leader, to do putting together a professional development, then don't forget the hands-on piece. Have a monthly, quarterly professional development meeting where, maybe you have them read a book and you talk about the book, and then you have a hands-on exercise where you say, okay, whatever your industry is, I ran a professional development for a company that works in the oil industry. And I said, okay, here's I'll put together a scenario for you. And I had a scenario built for them. And after we talked about the book, we ran through, and I put people in charge. I had 2 groups, put people in charge, and had them work through the scenario. And then we came together and talked about what they came up with and what was good and what wasn't good. So you got to have the hands-on piece for the professional development as well. And then the last piece of that is, I tell everybody who wants to be a leader, never, ever turn down a chance to be the leader. You should want to be the leader all the time. Great leaders want to lead all the time. I want to be the leader all the time. I don't care what's going on. I want to be the leader. Now, I understand when I walk in the house every night, I'm no longer the leader. I got that. There's a reason I have been happily married for 37 years. I know my place in this house. But tomorrow morning when I walk back out that door, I want to be the leader again.
Yeah.
That's it. Look, we can bring 1,000 people in here and tell you everything there is to know about leadership, and you can learn it all.
Mm.
But until you put it into practice, it means nothing. It's knowledge. Knowledge by itself means nothing. It's worthless, useless. You got to be able to use that knowledge. And the only way you're going to get to use that knowledge is to actually do it. Put it into practice so that you learn what works for you and what doesn't work for you. And you're going to make mistakes. We all make mistakes. Sorry. That's fact of life. So learn from those mistakes. So professional development is huge. You as a leader have to have one, and you have to provide one for the people who work for you as well. And here's why that's important. If I just joined your organization, brand new, right out of college or right out of high school, whatever, I may have aspirations to be a leader someday, to move up in your organization. If you don't provide me a pathway to get there, a way I can see that I can get to that, I'm going somewhere else that does. And now you've just lost one of your best people because you didn't take the time to provide them a pathway to become a leader.
Yeah, that's true. So we've talked about team building. We've talked about the art of delegation, leadership principles, gaining buy-in, building trust and community. Have I left anything else out? Is there anything we should add to this conversation?
So one of the things that I'm a big advocate of, because communication is huge. I always tell organizations, look, two things going to determine whether or not your organization has a possibility of being successful. Can't guarantee anything. There are no guarantees in this life except death. Taxes and death. That's it. There is no other guarantees in this life. But here's how, the two things that will give you a greater possibility of being successful is the quality of your leadership in the organization, not only yours, but everybody else's in your organization, and communication. Show me a company, an organization that has poor communications, and I'll show you a company or organization that is failing, I promise. So, really work on those organizational skills, all of them, written, oral, listening, which is the one that we all forget that's part of communication is listening. We don't do a good job of that. Most people don't. But one of the things that I emphasize for leaders is never underestimate the power of a handwritten note. If somebody did a great job, write them a handwritten note. I promise you the impact that will have is greater than anything you can imagine. I mean, I still have handwritten notes. I don't keep a whole lot of things. I'm not a pack rat, but I still have handwritten notes from some of my bosses who congratulated me on a great job or getting promoted or whatever. And I've had people come up to me, every single one of those 580 lieutenants that I've had my hand in commissioning, I wrote them a handwritten note, congratulating them on their commissioning and wishing them the best. And, I'm always here to, if you need advice or whatever. I've had people come back to me 15, 20 years later and show me their handwritten note that I gave to them all that time ago. They still have it. So never underestimate the power of a handwritten note.
It's interesting you mentioned that. I worked for a company that had a leader that retired. And this lady, the day before she retired, she came in late to the office and she had a card. She wrote a personal note to the 10 or 20 people that worked in the department, left the note on their desk in an envelope. And when I read my note, that given to me, I thought this woman had remembered conversations that I had had with her like 2 years ago. I don't know, maybe she wrote these notes down, but I did. I kept that thank you note. I thought that was very heartfelt. Yeah.
The power of a handwritten note is you can't even imagine what it is. I mean, it really is powerful.
Wow, amazing. I was going to mention when you said that listening is important, And we recently here in Canada had lost a former Prime Minister, Brian Mulroney. He was Prime Minister in the 80s and a Canadian leader even into the 90s. And his children, one of whom happens to be a media celebrity, was commenting on his father's passing. He said, so the news reporter asked him, what's the good advice? What's one piece of good advice that your father gave you? And he said, well, I was told to listen more and speak less. He said, we got 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we should listen more. And the news reporter who asked him that question said, it's interesting. My dad told me the same thing. And
Right.
as I listened to the news reporter and I listened to Brian Mulroney's son, I thought, my heavens, my father told me the same thing too. So it's this
Yeah.
this thing
I
of
think
generation.
anybody who's a good listener was told that at one point in their life.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's good. That's good. And on that note, I probably want to say thank you, Oak, for coming on. It's been fabulous. We've been chatting for about 30 minutes here, and I think it's just amazing. I probably gonna have to go out and buy your book now to learn a bit more. I also want to mention to the audience out there, yes, buy the book to know more about leadership. And the book again is Your Leadership Legacy: Becoming the Leader You Were Meant to Be. I also want to mention that Oak, if you do a nice, sweet Google search for him, you'll find him on a number of podcasts, and he certainly does presentations out there as well too. So if you're looking for someone to talk about leadership, by all means, feel free to call up Oakland McCulloch.
Would love to.
Great, fantastic. Well, thank you, Oak, for being on the show. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. This was a great conversation. You always know when you had a great conversation because you can't believe 30 minutes has passed.
I know, that's true. That's true.